Well, I'm more optimistic about about democracy in this. I think the way that the democratic process needs to work is people start talking about these problems, and then even if it seems like it starts slowly in terms of people caring about data issues and technology policy, because it's a lot harder to get everyone to care about it than it is just a small number of decision makers. So I think that the history of democracy versus more totalitarian systems is it always seems like the totalitarian systems are going to be more efficient and the democracies are just going to get left behind. But smart people, people start discussing these issues and caring about them. And I do think we see that people do now care much more about their own privacy, about data issues, about the technology industry. People are becoming more sophisticated about this. They realize that that having a lot of your data stored can both be an asset because it can help provide a lot of benefits and services to you, but increasingly maybe it's also a liability because there are hackers and nation states who might be able to break in and use that data against you or exploit it or reveal it. So maybe people don't want their data to be stored forever. Maybe they want it to be reduced in permanence. Maybe they want it all to be end-to-end encrypted as much as possible in their private communications. People really care about this stuff in a way that they didn't before, and that's certainly over the last several years, that's grown a lot. So I think that conversation is the normal democratic process, and I think what's going to end up happening is that by the time you get people broadly aware of the issues and on board, that is just a much more powerful approach, where then you do have people in a decentralized system who are capable of making decisions, who are smart, who I think will generally always do it better than too centralized of an approach. And here is, again, a place where I worry that personifying AI and saying AI is a thing, right, that an institution will develop and it's almost like a sentient being, I think mischaracterizes what it actually is, right? It's a set of methods that make everything better. Let me retract that. That's way too broad. It's a lot of technological processes more efficient. And I think that's
But that's the worry. It makes also...
That's not just for centralized folks, right? In our context, so we build, our business is this ad platform, and a lot of the way that can be used now is we have 90 million small businesses that use our tools. And now, because of this access to technology, they have access to the same tools to do advertising and marketing and reach new customers and grow jobs that previously only the big companies would have had. And that's a big advance, and that's a massive decentralization. When people talk about our company and the internet platforms overall, they talk about how there's a small number of companies that are big, and that's true, but the flip side of it is that now there are billions of people around the world who have a voice, that they can share information more broadly, and that's actually a massive decentralization in power, and kind of returning power to people. Similarly, people have access to more information, have access to more commerce. That's all positive. So I don't know. I'm an optimist on this. I think we have real work cut out for us, and I think that the challenges that you raise are the right ones to be thinking about, because if we get it wrong, that's the way in which I think it will go wrong. But I don't know. I think that the historical precedent would say that at all points, where there was the competition between the US and Japan in the 80s and the 70s, or the Cold War before that, or different other times, people always thought that the democratic model, which is slow to mobilize, but very strong once it does, and once people get bought into a direction and understand the issue, I do think that will continue to be the best way to spread prosperity around the world and make progress in a way that meets people's needs. And that's why when we're talking about internet policy, when you're talking about economic policy, I think spreading regulatory frameworks that encode those values, I think is one of the most important things that we can do. But it starts with raising the issues that you are and having people be aware of the potential problems.
Yeah, I agree that in the last few decades, it was the case that open democratic systems were better. and more efficient. And this, I'm again, one of my fears is that it might have made us a bit complacent, because we assume that this is kind of a law of nature, that distributed systems are always better and more efficient than centralized systems. And we grew up in a world in which there was kind of this, to do the good thing morally was also to do the efficient thing economically and politically. And a lot of countries liberalized their economy, their society, their politics over the last 50 years, more because they were convinced of the efficiency argument than of the deep moral argument. And what happens if efficiency and morality suddenly split? Which have happened before in history. I mean, the last 50 years are not representative of the whole of history. We had many cases before in human history in which repressive, centralized systems were more efficient, and therefore you got these repressive empires. And there is no law of nature which says that this cannot happen again. And again, my fear is that the new technology might tilt that balance. And just by making central data processing far more efficient, it could give a boost to totalitarian regimes. Also, in the balance of power between, say, again, the center and the individual, that for most of history, the central authority could not really know you personally, simply because of the inability to gather and process the information. So there were some people who knew you very well, but usually their interests were aligned with yours. Like my mother knows me very well, but most of the time I can trust my mother. But now we are reaching a point when some system far away can know me better than my mother, and the interests are not necessarily aligned. Now, yes, we can use that also for good, but what I'm pointing out, that this is a kind of power that never existed before, and it could empower totalitarian and authoritarian regimes to do things that was simply technically impossible until today.
Yeah.
And you know, if you live in an open democracy, so okay, you can rely on all kinds of mechanisms to protect yourself. But thinking more globally about this issue, I think a key question is, how do you protect human attention from being hijacked by malevolent players who know you better than you know yourself, who know you better than your mother knows you? And this is a question that we never had to face before, because we never had, usually the malevolent players just didn't know me very well.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot in what you were just talking about. I mean, I think in general, one of the things that, I do think that there is a scale effect where one of the best things that we could do if we care about these open values and having a globally connected world, I think making sure that the critical mass of the investment in new technologies encodes those values is really important. So that's one of the reasons why I care a lot about not supporting the spread of authoritarian policies to more countries, and either inadvertently doing that or setting precedents that enable that to happen. Because I think that the more development that happens in the way that is more open, where the research is more open, where people have where the policy making around it is more democratic, I think that that's going to be positive. So I think kind of maintaining that balance ends up being really important. And one of the reasons why I think democratic countries over time tend to do better on serving what people want is because there's no metric to optimize the society, right? It's when you talk about efficiency, a lot of what people are talking about is economic efficiency, right? Are we increasing GDP? Are we increasing jobs? Are we decreasing poverty? And those things are all good, but I think part of what the democratic process does is people get to decide on their own which of the dimensions in society matter the most to them in their lives.
If you can hijack people's attention and manipulate them, then people deciding on their own just doesn't help, because I don't realize it, that somebody manipulated me to think that this is what I want. And we are reaching the point when for the first time in history, you can do that on a massive scale. So again, I speak a lot about the issue of free will in this regard. And the people that are easiest to manipulate are the people who believe in free will and who simply identify with whatever thought or desire pops up in their mind, because they cannot even imagine that this desire is not the result of my free will. This desire is the result of some external manipulation. Now, it may sound paranoid, and for most of history, it was probably paranoid because nobody had this kind of ability to do it on a massive scale. But here, like in Silicon Valley, the tools to do that on a massive scale have been developed over the last few decades, and they may have been developed with the best intentions. Some of them may have been developed with the intention of just selling stuff to people and selling products to people. But now the same tools that can be used to sell me something I don't really need can now be used to sell me a politician I really don't need, or an ideology that I really don't need. It's the same tools. It's the same hacking the human animal and manipulating what's happening inside.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot going on here. I think that there's, when designing these systems, I think that there's the intrinsic design, which you want to make sure that you get right, and then there's preventing abuse, which I think is something that there's two types of questions that people raise. I mean, one is, we saw what the Russian government tried to do in the 2016 election. That is, that's clear abuse. We need to build up really advanced systems for detecting that kind of interference in the democratic process and more broadly, being able to identify when people are standing up networks of fake accounts that are not behaving in a way that normal people would, to be able to weed those out and work with law enforcement and election commissions and folks all around the world and intelligence community to be able to coordinate and be able to deal with that effectively. So stopping abuse is certainly important. But I would argue that the even more, the deeper question is about the intrinsic design of the systems, right? Exactly. So not just fighting the abuse. And there, I think that the incentives are more aligned towards a good outcome than a lot of critics might say. And here's why. I think that there's a difference between what people want first order and what they want second order over time, right? So right now you might just consume a video because you think it's silly or fun, and you wake up and or you kind of look up an hour later and you've watched a bunch of videos and you're like, well, what happened to my time? And okay, so maybe in the narrow short-term period you consumed some more content. And maybe you saw some more ads, so it seems like it's good for the business, but it actually really isn't over time, because people make decisions based on what they find valuable. And what we find, at least in our work, is that what people really want to do is connect with other people, right? It's not just passively consume content. So we've had to find and constantly adjust our systems over time to make sure that we're rebalancing it so that way you're interacting with people, so that way we make sure that we don't just measure systems in the signals in the system, like what are you clicking on, because that that could get you into a bad local optimum. But instead we bring in real people to tell us what their real experience is in words, right? Not just kind of filling out scores, but also telling us what were the most meaningful experiences you had today, what content was the most important? What interaction did you have with a friend that mattered to you the most? And was that connected to something that we did? And if not, then we go and try to do the work to figure out how we can facilitate that. And what we find is that, in the near term, maybe showing some people some more viral videos might increase time, right? But over the long term, it doesn't. It's not actually aligned with our business interest or the long-term social interest. So in strategy terms, that would be a stupid thing to do. And now I think a lot of people think that businesses are just very short-term oriented and that we only care about, people think that businesses only care about the next quarter profit. But I think that most businesses that get run well, that's just not the case. And I think last year, on one of our earnings calls, I told investors that we'd actually reduce the amount of video watching that quarter by 50 million hours a day because we wanted to take down the amount of viral videos that people were seeing because we thought that that was displacing more meaningful interactions that people were having with other people, which in the near term might have a short-term impact on the business for that quarter, but over the long term would be more positive, both for how people feel about the products and for the business. And one of the patterns that I think has actually been quite inspiring or a cause of optimism in running a business is that oftentimes you make decisions that you think are going to pay off long down the road, right? So you think, okay, I'm doing the right thing long term, but it's going to hurt for a while. Mm-hmm. And I almost always find that the long term comes sooner than you think. And that when you make these decisions that they're maybe taking some pain in the near term in order to get to what will be a better case down the line, that better case, maybe you think it'll take 5 years, but actually it ends up coming in a year. Right, and I think people at some deep level know when something is good, and I guess this gets back to the democratic values because at some level I trust that people have a sense of what they actually care about, and it may be that if we were showing more viral videos, maybe that would be better than the alternatives that they have to do right now, right? I mean, maybe that's better than what's on TV because at least they're personalized videos. Maybe it's better than YouTube if we have better content or whatever the reason is. But I think you can still make the service better over time for actually matching what people want. And if you do that, that is going to be better for everyone. So I do think the intrinsic design of these systems is quite aligned with serving people in a way that is pro-social. And that's certainly what I care about in running this company is to get there.
Yeah, I think this is like the rock bottom. That this is the most important issue, that ultimately what I'm hearing from you and from many other people when I have these discussions is ultimately the customer is always right, the voter knows best, people know deep down, people know what is good for them, people make a choice, if they choose to do it, then it's good. That has been the bedrock of at least Western democracies for centuries, for generations. And this is now where the big question mark is. Is it still true in a world where we have the technology to hack human beings and manipulate them like never before, that the customer is always right, that the voter knows best? Or have we gone past this point? And we can know, I mean, and the simple ultimate answer that, well, this is what people want and they know what's good for them, maybe it's no longer the case.
Well, yeah, I think that it's not clear to me that has changed, but I think that that's a very deep question about democracy.
This is the deepest...
I don't think that that's a new question. I mean, I think it's people have always...
No, the question isn't new. The technology is new. I mean, if you lived in 19th century America and you didn't have these extremely powerful tools to decipher and influence people, then it was a different...
Well, let me actually frame this a different way,
okay.
Which is, I actually think, for all the talk around is democracy being hurt by the current set of tools and the media and all this. I actually think that there's an argument the world is significantly more democratic now than it was in the past. I mean, the country was set up as, the US was set up as a republic, right? So a lot of the foundational rules limited the power of a lot of individuals being able to vote and have a voice, and checked the popular will at a lot of different stages, everything from the way that laws get written by Congress, right, and not by people. So to everything to the Electoral College, and which a lot of people think today is undemocratic. But I mean, it was put in place because of a set of values that a democratic republic would be better. I actually think what has happened today is that increasingly more people are enfranchised and more people have a voice. More people are getting the vote, but increasingly people have a voice, more people have access to information. And I think a lot of what people are asking is that good? it's not necessarily the question of, okay, the democratic process has been the same, but now the technology is different. I think the technology has made it so individuals are more empowered, and part of the question is that the world that we want? And again, this is an area where it's not that, I mean, all these things are with challenges, right? And often progress causes a lot of issues, and it's a really hard thing to reason through. Wow, we're trying to make progress and help all these people join the global economy, or help people join the communities and have the social lives that they would want and be accepted in different ways. But it comes with this dislocation in the near term, and that's a massive dislocation, so that seems really painful. But I actually think that you can make a case that we are at and continue to be at the most democratic time. And I think that overall, in the history of our country at least, when we've gotten more people to have the vote, and we've gotten more representation, and we've made it so people have access to more information, and more people can share their experiences, I do think that that's made the country stronger and has helped progress. And it's not that this stuff is without issues. It has massive issues, but that's at least the pattern that I see, and why I'm optimistic about a lot of the work.
I agree that more people have more voice than ever before, both in the US and globally. I think you're absolutely right. My concern is to what extent we can trust the voice of people, to what extent I can trust my voice. Like we have this picture of the world, that I have this voice inside me which tells me what is right and what is wrong. And the more I'm able to express this voice in the outside world and influence what's happening, and the more people can express their voices, it's better, it's more democratic. But what happens if at the same time that more people can express their voices, it's also easier to manipulate your inner voice? To what extent you can really trust that the thought that just popped up in your mind is the result of some free will, and not the result of an extremely powerful algorithm that understands what's happening inside you and knows how to push the buttons and press the levers, and is serving some external entity, and it has planted this thought or this desire that you now express. So it's two different issues of giving people voice and trusting. And again, I'm not saying I know everything, but all these people that now join the conversation, we cannot trust their voices. I'm asking this about myself, to what extent I can trust my own inner voice. And I spend 2 hours meditating every day, and I go on these long meditation retreats. And my main takeaway from that is it's craziness inside there. And it's so complicated. And the simple, naive belief that the thought that pops up in my mind, this is my free will, this was never the case. But if, say, 1,000 years ago, the battles inside were mostly between, neurons and biochemicals and childhood memories and all that, increasingly, you have external actors going under your skin and into your brain and into your mind. And how do I trust that my amygdala is not a Russian agent now? How do I know? The more we understand about the extremely complex world inside us, the less easy it is to simply trust what this inner voice is saying.
Yeah, I understand the point that you're making. As one of the people who's running a company that develops ranking systems to try to help show people content that's going to be interesting to them, there's a dissonance between the way that you're explaining what you think is possible and what I see as a practitioner building this. I think you can build systems that can get good at a very specific thing, right? At helping to understand which of your friends you care the most about, so you can rank their content higher in newsfeed. But the idea that there's some kind of generalized AI that's a monolithic thing that understands all dimensions of who you are, in a way that's deeper than you do, I think doesn't exist and is probably quite far off from existing. So there's certainly abuse of the systems that I think needs to be, that I think is more of a policy and values question, which is, on Facebook, you're supposed to be your real identity. So if you have, to use your example, Russian agents or folks from the government, or the IRA, who are posing as someone else and saying something, and you see that content, but you think it's coming from someone else, then that's not an algorithm issue. I mean, that's someone abusing the system and taking advantage of the fact that you trust that on this platform, someone is generally going to be who they say they are. So you can trust that the information is coming from someplace and kind of slipping in the back door that way. And that's the thing that we certainly need to go fight. But I don't know. As a broad matter, I do think that there's this question of to what degree are the systems, and this kind of brings it full circle to where we started on is it fragmentation or is it personalization? Is the content that you see, if it resonates, is that because it actually just more matches your interests, or is it because you're being incepted and convinced of something that you don't actually believe and is dissonant with your interests and your beliefs? And certainly all the psychological research that I've seen and the experience that we've had is that when people see things that don't match what they believe, they just ignore it, right? So certainly there can be an evolution that happens where a system shows information that you're going to be interested in, and if that's not managed well, that has the risk of pushing you down a path towards adopting a more extreme position or evolving the way you think about it over time. But I think most of the content, it resonates with people because it resonates with their lived experience, and to the extent that people are abusing that, and either trying to represent that they're someone who they're not, or trying to take advantage of a bug in human psychology where we might be more prone to an extremist idea. That's our job in either policing the platform, working with governments and different agencies, and making sure that we design our systems and our recommendation systems to not be promoting things that people might engage with in the near term, but over the long term will regret and resent us for having done that. And I think it's in our interest to get that right. And for a while, I think we didn't understand the depth of some of the problems and challenges that we face there. And there's certainly still a lot more to do. And when you're up against nation states, I mean, they're very sophisticated, so they're going to keep on evolving their tactics. But the thing that I think is really important is that the fundamental design of the systems, I do think, and our incentives are aligned with helping people connect with the people they want, have meaningful interactions, not just getting people to watch a bunch of content that they're going to resent later that they did that, and certainly not making people have more extreme or negative viewpoints than what they actually believe. So
maybe I can try and summarize my view in that. We have two distinct dangers coming out of the same technological tools. We have the easier danger to grasp, which is of extreme totalitarian regimes of a kind we haven't seen before. And this could happen in different, maybe not in the US, but in other countries, that these tools, you say that these are abuses, but in some countries, this could become the norm, that you are living from the moment you're born in this system that constantly monitors and surveils you and constantly kind of manipulates you from a very early age to adopt particular ideas, views, habits, so forth, in a way which was never possible before. And this is like the full-fledged totalitarian dystopia, which could be so effective that people would not even resent it because they will be completely aligned with the values or the ideals of the system. It's not 1984 where you need to torture people all the time. No, if you have agents inside their brain, you don't need the external secret police. So that's one danger It's like the full-fledged totalitarianism. Then in places like the US, the more immediate danger or problem to think about is what is increasingly people refer to as surveillance capitalism, that you have these systems that constantly interact with you and come to know you, and it's all supposedly in your best interests to give you better recommendations and better advice. So it starts with recommendation for which movie to watch and where to go on vacation. But as the system becomes better, it gives you a recommendation on what to study at college, where to work, ultimately whom to marry, who to vote for, which religion to join, like join a community. Like you have all these religious communities, this is the best religion for you. For your type of personality, Judaism, nah, it won't work for you, go with Zen Buddhism. It's a much better fit for your personality. You would thank us. In 5 years, you would look back and you say, this was an amazing recommendation, thank you. I so much enjoy Zen Buddhism. And again, people will feel that this is aligned with their own best interests. And the system improves over time. Yeah, there will be glitches. Not everybody will be happy all the time. But what does it mean that all the most important decisions in my life are being taken by an external algorithm? What does it mean in terms of human agency, in terms of, the meaning of life? For thousands of years, humans tended to view life as a drama of decision-making. Like life is it's a journey, you reach an intersection after intersection, and you need to choose. Some decisions are small, like what to eat for breakfast, and some decisions are really big, like whom to marry. And almost all of art and all of religion is about that. Like almost whether it's a Shakespeare tragedy or a Hollywood comedy, it's about the hero or heroine needing to make a big decision, to be or not to be, to marry X or to marry Y. And what does it mean to live in a world in which increasingly we rely on the recommendations of algorithms to make these decisions until we reach a point when we simply follow them all the time or most of the time? And they make good recommendations. I'm not saying that this is some abuse, something sinister. No, they're good recommendations. But we don't have a model for understanding what is the meaning of human life in such a situation.
Well, I think the biggest objection that I'd have to both of the ideas that you just raised is that we have access to a lot of different sources of information, a lot of people to talk to about different things. And it's not just like there's one set of recommendations or a single recommendation that gets to dominate what we do, and that gets to be overwhelming, either in the totalitarian or the capitalist model of what you were saying. To the contrary, I think people really don't like and are very distrustful when they feel like they're being told what to do or just have a single option. One of the big questions that we've studied is how to address when there's a hoax or clear misinformation. And the most obvious thing that it would seem like you'd do intuitively is tell people, hey, this seems like it's wrong. Here is the other point of view that is right. Or at least, if it's a polarized thing, even if it's not clear what's wrong and what's right, here's the other point of view, if you're on any given issue. And that really doesn't work, right? So what ends up happening is if you tell people that something is false, but they believe it, then they just end up not trusting you, right? So that ends up not working. And if you frame two things as opposites, right? So if you say, okay, well, you're a person who doesn't believe in, you're seeing content about not believing in climate change, so I'm going to show you the other perspective, right? Here's something that argues that climate change is a thing. That actually just entrenches you further because it's, okay, someone's trying to kind of control. So what ends up working, right, sociologically and psychologically, the thing that ends up actually being effective is giving people a range of choices. So if you show not here's the other opinion and with a judgment on the piece of content that a person engaged with, but instead you show a series of related articles, right, or content, then people can kind of work out for themselves, hey, here's the range of different opinions or things that, that exist on this topic. And maybe I lean in one direction or the other, but I'm kind of going to work out for myself where I want to be. Most people don't choose the most extreme thing. And people end up feeling like they're informed and can make a good decision. So at the end of the day, I think that that's the architecture and the responsibility that we have, is to make sure that the work that we're doing gives people more choices, that it's not a given a single opinion that can kind of dominate anyone's thinking, but where you can connect to hundreds of different friends, and even if most of your friends share your religion or your political ideology, you're probably going to have 5 or 10% of friends who come from a different background, who have different ideas, and at least that's getting in as well. So you're getting a broader range of views. So I think that these are really important questions, and it's not like there's an answer that is going to fully solve it one way or another.
Definitely not.
But I think that these are the right things to talk through. We've been going for 90 minutes, so we probably should wrap up. But I think we have a lot of material to cover in the next one of these that hopefully we'll get to do at some point in the future. And thank you so much for coming and joining and doing this. This has been a really interesting series of important topics to discuss.
Yeah, so thank you for hosting me, and for being open about these very difficult questions, which I know that you being the head of a global corporation, I can just sit here and speak whatever I want, but you have many more responsibilities on your head. So I appreciate that kind of you putting yourself on the firing line and dealing with these questions.
Thanks. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.